Welcome back. I'm visiting here today with Harry Avila. Harry, welcome to today's show.
Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, Harry, you've been a long-time resident of the Fremont area, and I'd like to spend some time kind of reflecting of what you've seen over the years. Right now, we see starter homes at $1 million, but it wasn't always that way. What was the community like when you first came here?
Well, when I first came here, Alan, I was born here. So this was in the 30s. So I've actually spent parts of 9 decades in Washington Township, Fremont, Newark, Union City. What it was like was it was farmland. There were 10,000 people. It was immigrants, primarily Azorean immigrants when I was here, particularly in the Warm Springs area.
Now, you ended up, getting an education in the pharmacy area and becoming a pharmacist initially, or?
Well, I started out, Dad had a farm. As a matter of fact, the farm is located where the entrance to Tesla is today.
Okay.
My grandfather had bought that back in 89. So when it came time to choosing an occupation, I started San Jose State, then UC Berkeley, then UC Med Center, coming out in the early 60s.
And then what was it like trying to develop a career out here? I guess your dad was in the farming industry, you mentioned, and
well, it was funny because you reflect back on and you see that these people were working a strong 40 hours a week, and then they would come home and they would do their farming then too. So it was not unusual if you worked, midnight or graveyard shift to suddenly come home at 8 o'clock in the morning, sleep a few hours, and get up and start farming. And indeed, we raised oat hay in the Warm Springs area. And it was really something where you struggled to make that extra $2,000 a year because that was big money at that time, of course.
So 10,000 people in the community in the early 30s.
In the entire area on here. And now we're pushing 300,000, 350,000.
So why did you decide to move away from agriculture as a career?
Well, my mother worked in Milpitas, and it was just about the time that the automobile industry was coming into the Ford factory in Milpitas, General Motors here. And at that point, she was working for a physician, and I had the ability to go over and sit behind the counter at the local drugstore. Much more interesting than what the physician was doing. The books were a lot better, i.e. there were comic books. And hence, Sal Crackalisi, who had the pharmacy and ultimately became a mover and shaker, became sort of my mentor. It was an easy decision to go to UC. State of California was superb in the education that it provided me.
It still is a great educational system.
Superb.
So you had, fast forwarding up here. That graduation from school was the 50s and
actually early 60s. I picked up my doctorate then, and then as I came back to this community and did some relief work, pharmacy work. And then a short stint in the Army, the Air Force, and then the California Air National Guard. I came back out, and there was a group who were franchising pharmacies at that time, looking for young pharmacists to come in, and they would give us 50% of the operation to buy out in 5 years. And hence, not unlike Rexall and Walgreens at the time, I had the opportunity to pick up a pharmacy in the area and in the village of Niles, which became my home base.
Franchising was a new concept back then.
Absolutely. Frank Ferguson and Harry Barrows were way ahead of their times. They had a pharmacist out of the Lafayette area by the name of Bill Ames, who was just a superb entrepreneur and really provided great ideas.
So how many years did you do the pharmacy for?
Well, I stayed there until about 1968, but at that time, it was an amazing concept because what was happening is that Niles was in one of its typical doldrums going down, and Mrs. Grimshaw came up and said, "Harry, won't you buy my hotel?" And I said, "I'm a pharmacist. I know nothing about hotels." "Oh, please buy it, Harry. My husband has passed on." So I got 3 other guys, and each of us put in $10,000. We suddenly found ourselves owner of the Niles Wesley Hotel, 26 rooms renting out, plus about 5,000 square feet below, plus back areas to be rented. And from there, the career in real estate began.
Harry, I'm running up against the break, but I want to circle back to Niles, the history of Niles, because very unique background, how it was a movie production area. But I need to take a quick break.
Certainly.
And we'll be right back after these messages. We're visiting here today with Harry Avila, longtime Fremont resident, and we'll be right back.
Grandpa, can we do chemistry? Papa, Daddy. Grandpa, let's do something fun.
We'll help you stay organized so you can focus on what really matters in life. Give us a call today and see how we can help you start saving taxes. Welcome back. I'm visiting here today with Harry Avila. And Harry, in the first segment, we're talking about you landed your first business, pharmacy in Niles. But let's circle back on Niles. How did Niles get its name and some of the history there?
Well, it's fascinating because you look at it today and it's, 1 block long, 3 blocks deep, the commercial area. But you don't really realize the significance that when the Transcontinental Railroad, 1869, went from California back into St. Louis, Chicago, that Niles was the last jumping off point from the Bay Area before goods were shipped to Chicago. So what occurred was that the Central Pacific Railroad established the new town, the current town of Niles. It ended up that because it was the last stop, you suddenly had 4 large hotels, 3-story venues on there, and with people meeting the 26 trains a day because there was so much traffic and the opportunity to send the agricultural products, the orange trees from the Shen nursery, items from the California nursery, back to the Eastern market. Niles was a booming town and continued on so because in 1912, Bronco Billy Anderson and George Spohr, S&A, developed Niles, saw Niles as the area for the movie industry. So between 12 and 16, 12 and 15, they produced over 375 movies featuring Charlie Chaplin, featuring so many of the early movie stars coming out of Niles. And what occurred was that the local people obviously had roles as either extras or ultimately followed them down to Hollywood when the move occurred. So fascinating area. What occurred subsequently to that on there was that Niles itself began to develop. You had automobile agencies coming in, the Giulio Pontiac, the Chevrolet agency, the Rose Ford agency. So Niles was a booming area because it was on the San Jose to Oakland Upper Road, the Mission Boulevard. So in essence, it really went through times, and early on they wanted to make it the county seat for Alameda County. What occurred after that? Obviously, the Depression hit, doldrums hit, all sorts of elements. When I came in the early 60s, we were having one of the down areas, and which afforded me the opportunity to really get to know the town well. And so as you sat around, you saw all of these people who loved the community. We sat down and we said, hey, what can we do? And one of my customers came in and said, why don't we start a flea market? That flea market is still going some 50 plus years later on, because each year the community in the last week in August comes together and literally has an entire community day of sales and such. Fantastic element. The Niles Christmas parades had it start much later, but yet that continues on. So you have a very tight community in which we have 6 museums in that town. And you say, really, museums? Well, they're quasi-museums, but they're amazing areas. If you go to the bus museum, there's 30 buses from antique vintage there. The Niles S&A Theater has over 13,000 films, silent films, one of the largest collections of films. And obviously there are 4 other areas that we could go on. Hey, that's really a pitch, isn't it, for the Niles Village?
It is. And I think that people often will drive through Niles. They'll see the old structures, but they don't understand these histories. So I appreciate the insight on that. I'm visiting here today with Harry Avila. He's a longtime Fremont resident, first business over in Niles. And Harry, I need to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after these messages. Since you can't take your wealth with you, spend time with your family. Welcome back. I'm visiting here today with Harry Avila. He's a longtime Fremont resident. And Harry, in the earlier segments, we talked about Niles, a place that you had your first business. I bought a hotel in there. And then 1960, you transitioned into a different type of career direction. What inspired you for this?
California offered so many opportunities for us, Alan. What I found was that as you begin to network in the community, our community here, Washington Township, Fremont, Newark, some amazing people. So, for example, in the early 60s, let's say about 65, this CPA came into my life, a kid by the name of Bob DeMarta, who ultimately started a firm called Greenstein, DeMarta, and Rogoff. You may be familiar with it.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, so, 65 to today of 2018, my God, that's 53 years that I've been associated with your firm on here, and wisely so, because if one selects the proper CPA, financial people, the best attorney you can get, which I had in Harry Shepard, and then you also establish relationships with the financial institutions, things can happen. And that's indeed what happened, because in 68, I saw the opportunity to move out to Dakota Road and Alvarado Niles, and we opened up a pharmacy there. Across from Washington Hospital, I had the opportunity to open up Maori pharmacies, and then we began distribution into hospitals and skilled nursing facilities, and then there were some pharmacists who simply wanted to sell their pharmacies. I had young pharmacists who were willing to come in, and this community provided some superb people who worked for our organization, and it came easy. However, as it came on, you suddenly found out that the opportunities in real estate in California were so great that suddenly you said, hey, it's really necessary to spend more time. At the same time, the education that the University of California had provided me gave me a large background in healthcare, and I joined the Washington Hospital Board and spent 20 some odd years as chairman of the board, as development of strategic planning, doing a very significant part in the development of Washington Hospital that gave me additional education and hopefully helped the community. In the early 80s, some of my buddies, again, having to do with the legal and financial elements as well as the accounting, said, hey, why don't we start some banks? Banking for me? And ultimately, that's where Mission Valley Bancorp, California Bank Shares, and ultimately U.S. Bank came in when we sold with some 32 units. So it's been a fast life, Ellen, but really, California offers these opportunities, in particular, Washington Township. It's really an amazing, amazing story that a kid comes off the farm and has the opportunity to do all of these things because of the relationships that you develop and the opportunities you have.
As you reflect back today and fast forwarding into the world today, if you were that young entrepreneur today, would you see the same opportunities in place that you saw back then?
Oh, absolutely. But first, you recognize that it's the extended family that is also so key. I had an extended family in the Portuguese community, an extended family in the Italian community, and my God, they helped me to raise 3 marvelous kids who had a marvelous mother. And, that's really the life gratifications. But the opportunities, in 62, I walked through Frank Gorian's laboratory in physical chemistry, and up on his desk, Frank said, Harry, look at this. And I said, what is it that you're building? And he said, it's a computer. He said, Harry, you should really come in as a teaching assistant and join me in the building of this computer. I said, I've got to get into retail pharmacy. I don't have time for that nonsense. You know, so there are opportunities bypassed, there are opportunities taken, but they are still available today. So many. Aggressiveness, a little risk-taking when you're younger, but they're available to you.
You know, it's amazing how this whole area has transformed from the farming community in the Silicon Valley, and now the high rise and the infrastructure is just, the housing can't be found. It's
Housing is the issue, isn't it, on there? You know, we see it so close to us here, right on the other side of Bart, with the Gardino property going up. And in Niles, we see changes. Certainly, this is an area, and I think that we're going to go into an area of very significance, because if we do not choose to find affordable housing, indeed, the economy will lapse, because we depend so much on people today. Very interesting times. And indeed, therein lies the opportunity. My son is involved in in development of homes. And already, you see people going out to the Rio Vista area, further on out. So this demands transportation and easy egress and ingress into the Bay Area. So what does it hold? It holds opportunity to solve these problems.
That's a very keen observation. And I think that, we've seen in the San Francisco real estate market, the fact that they can't get the workers because it's too expensive to live there, they've had to scale back and slow down.
That's correct. And that can be the limiting factor, Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you go about attracting people? Obviously, salary is one, but more important is that quality of life and the quality of accommodations that you afford them. Plus, the most valuable thing we have is our time. And if we spend it traveling to and from work, that's not really a proper use of our time.
So reflecting back, the things that, let's start with things that you regret, that you wish you would have done in a different way.
Ellen, that list becomes so large. But, as we're talking, it's the humorous things that you have that you regret. As you looked at coming home from San Jose State, you stopped off every day at a hamburger place and bought that 14-cent hamburger, and you knew that new hamburger place that was selling their hamburgers for 15 cents was never going to make it. Some outfit by the name of McDonald's, I think. And so you looked at that and laughed. In the 70s, people came in and said, please, can we put in software into your pharmacies and utilize it and give you some diversification? I said, that's ridiculous. All the software that's ever been developed has been developed. There's no market coming up on there. Ellen, there are so many areas of regret that you have. The thing to really consider is to keep one's mind open and to constantly be motivated to go upwards and get additional education so you understand what's going on.
Hey, Ray, I got to take a quick break. I want life. And this is not an easy question, but it's one that I have to ask, Harry. Greatest accomplishments when you look back, things that you really are proud of.
As I just spent the weekend with my oldest son, and you're looking and you're saying, my God, that kid is my son. You recognize his abilities, his intensity. He's doing Ironman. He's going back to Boulder on June 10th to compete in hopes of going into Kona Ironman Championship, World Championship. His attitude, his understanding, and his way to deal with people. Tim, my middle son, has gone through 3 startups now, and just each one he brings so much skill to. At my point, it's almost ridiculous for me to ask him what he's doing because his algorithms and the development of products is really unique. And Gina Marie is up in Seattle with Amazon as a vice president now, doing so well. My God, those are accomplishments. Perhaps I had a little bit to do with it, but it was so much more the extended family that really made a difference. Their mother was superb. And, Ellen, that brings up an interesting point because Janet was just this superb woman. And we let weeds grow in our marriage garden. Certainly my fault, but everyone's fault. That is one of, perhaps not an accomplishment, but maybe an understanding now, is do not let weeds grow in that marriage garden. Pluck them out, tend to them, put a little fertilizer on them, make sure you take care of them. That's sort of one of the regrets of my life. Other accomplishments, the work that I've done with the communities in Niles Rotary after 50 years, and you see the local, the community, the national and the international effects of Rotary, because after all, in that organization, you get anything done that you want, whether it's a breast cancer program in the Azores or housing in new hospitals in Guatemala or water in Kenya, or just a simple local scholarship here and sending a kid back to London for his master's. You can make a difference on there. So those are, in the Washington hospital years, you look now and see how Washington has integrated not only medical care, but community public health care and additional sources of revenue. For example, the Walgreens development on there is all owned by Washington and came about because of a willingness to step out and perceive a hospital district as more than just delivering hospital healthcare services. Ellen, I'm not sure what accomplishments I've had. I did knock my handicap down to a 13 on the golf. That's a pretty good accomplishment. And hopefully I've made some friends. I know I've got a few that I should patch up, but I really had some great relationships in my life.
It's interesting as we go through life, managing our day-to-day, and every decision we make has a whole set of consequences.
So true.
But we learn in the process. So, Harry, it's been a pleasure having you here today.
Most enjoyable, Alan.
And just getting this little piece of history in Fremont from a lifelong resident, and it's been a remarkable life and career. And also, I appreciate the times that we've known each other. It's been going on some 30 years now.
Yes. Yeah. And let's not understate the effect of your CPA on your life. Big, big things. We can go back to Lloyd's of London and how Maury, your partner, saved my backside in so many ways.
Well, thanks for being on today's show.
Certainly my pleasure, Ollie.